I'm Michelle Jeffers, and I'm the Chief of Community Programs and Partnerships at San Francisco Public Library. And we'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. The San Francisco Public Library acknowledges that we occupy the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone people, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. We recognize that we benefit from living and working on their homeland, and as uninvited guests, we affirm their sovereign rights as First Peoples and wish to pay our respects to the ancestors, elders, and relatives of the Ramaytush community. You can join us in the chat by telling us what native land you are joining us from today. Also, before we get started, I know you're just starting this event, but you can also come back for next month's Grotto Night, which is Bay-centric, Writers on the Bay Area. That's going to be on October 29th, and it's with Grotto members Lori Ann Doyle, Douglas Henderson, Dominic Lim, and Kathy Seligman talking about stories set in the Bay Area. We'll put the links in the chat about how to see the details and register for that Grotto Night. Instead of introducing our writers tonight, I'm going to introduce you to our moderator, who is Matthew Felix. He is the author of 4 books, a certified life coach, and a speaker. His most recent book, Porcelain Travels, was a Forward Indies Humor Book of the Year finalist. He's the former host of the San Francisco Writers Conference podcast, and he regularly conducts interviews at San Francisco Bay Area bookstores and cultural institutions. He'll moderate our talk tonight. Please ask questions in the Q&A function or in the chat, and we'll get to questions toward the end of our talk. But let's have a great conversation, Grotto Night.
That is the hope. Thank you very much, Michelle, and thanks to everyone for being here. Thanks for everyone else at the library as well, making sure that that all is well from a technical perspective, and thanks for having us also. So let me go ahead and introduce our 3 panelists tonight, my fellow Grotto members. Starting first, I'm just going to go in alphabetical order. First off being Britta Stromeyer. In addition to being an award-winning author of children's books, Britta's writing appears in Flash Fiction Magazine and Bending Genres Journal. She was a finalist for the Bellingham Review Tobias Wolff Award for Fiction, and her nonfiction articles and essays have appeared in a variety of magazines, including OCWW's About Right and the Marin Independent Journal. Britta is a member of the National Book Critics Circle and PEN, as well as a frequent speaker on writing trauma. Welcome, Britta. Lisa Lerner has been writing kid lit for educational publishers for over 25 years. She is also the author of the novel Just Like Beauty, a New York Times Notable Book of the Year, which is currently in development as a movie. Lisa belongs to the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, adjudicates for the Scholastics Art and Writing Competition, and serves as a trustee for the Kingston Public Library. She really enjoys petting rabbits and eating cake, but don't we all? Stephanie Wildman, last but not least, is author of 5 children's books. She became a professor emerita after serving as the J.A. and Elizabeth H. Sutro Chair at Santa Clara Law. She's a grandmother, a mother, spouse, friend, and good listener who can sit crisscross applesauce thanks to her yoga practice. Today, she is reading her latest book, Ghostwriter, co-authored with Cecilia Populus Eudave and illustrated by Stefania Razo, available in Spanish as Escritor Fantasma. Those intros, of course, only touch on a little bit of what our panelists have done, and there are many accomplishments. If you'd like to know more, you can check out the webpage for this event, or of course, go to their individual sites of each of those authors. Okay, so before we dive into the panel, each of the authors is going to read from their one of their children's books. And like I said, I'm just going to go in alphabetical order. So Britta, if you would like to read us your book, we are all ears.
All right, thank you, Matthew. Let me just share my screen since this is a picture book panel and kid lit. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening, and thank you for the library for So I will be reading from my latest book, and I'm just going to give you a little teaser. I'm not going to read the whole book because I want you to go to the library and check it out. And this is titled, Look at Me, Who Do You See? And I'm going to just go right into it. Hi, I'm Eunice. Look at me. Who do you see? I bet you'll say a rhino. Everybody thinks I'm a rhino. What if I tell you I'm actually a unicorn? I bet you'll say, but Eunice, you look like a rhino. You huff like a rhino. Even your poop smells of rhino. I see your point. My mom is a rhino. My dad is a rhino. My brother and sister are rhinos. My grandma, grandpa, my uncles, aunts, and cousins are, you guessed it, rhinos. You look like a rhino. You are a rhino. But while my family rests in reed beds, that's what rhinos do, I play peekaboo with my fairy friend, blow bubbles and chase rainbows, while they cross their rhino horn, my hoofs, shine my magical horn, and sprinkle pixie dust. While they soak in soupy mud, that's what rhinos do. I don my favorite rainbow dress, style my tail, and parade around in my sparkly rainbow hat. That's not what rhinos do. It's what unicorns do. Ta-da! Look at me. I'm definitely a unicorn. Eunice, you're not a real unicorn. The others grunt and groan. You look like a rhino. You are a rhino. Look. You don't have a mane, like a real unicorn. Your horn is chunky and stumpy. It's small. Your horn isn't magical at all. Eunice, we all agree, you look like a rhino. You are a rhino. Is this true? Are they right? Could I be wrong? My insides squish, my tummy twinges. I feel all mixed up. My hair is short and sparse. My skin has lots of folds. My horn is bulky and bent. It's not spiraling. Oh no, don't look at me. I'm not a real unicorn. I better take off my rainbow dress, toss my rainbow hat, and wallow in gooey, gloomy mud. Yuck, I'm cloaked in muck like a rhino. But I still don't feel like a rhino. Sniff, snuff, snuffle. Wait, do you see that? And I'm gonna stop here and leave you on this little cliffhanger. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Britta. I don't think that any of us have doubts that Eunice is a real unicorn. I mean, to me, it was glaringly obvious that Eunice is a real unicorn, but we'll leave that, like you said, to people to go get it from the library and figure out or experience the rest of the story. All right, so next up is Lisa. If you would like to share your book, we would love to hear it.
All right, thank you. I think I unmuted myself. Did I do it?
You did. You did.
Excellent, excellent. I'm already ahead of the game. Britta, that was so cute. I love that story. And I think we're going to go do a complete 180 now, going into Monsterland. All right, you can see it?
We can see it.
Then here we go. The Muddy Monster Party. Written by me and illustrated by Dave Clark, who, by the way, I never met. And also, I want to just say this book is not something you can find in the library or bookstores because it's only for the school market. So I just wanted to be clear about that in case you look for it. There's the title page, and let's go. Lunch was over. All the monsters had finished their snake sandwiches and slurped their slime juice. Now it was time to play. Isabella called her friends over to the slide. I am having a muddy monster party next week, she told them. Then she waved the party list. You are all invited. All her friends cheered. But if you want to come, Isabella said, you must do whatever I say. Isabella waved the list again. If you don't, I will cross your name off my list. Isabella climbed to the top of the slide. One more thing, she said. Everyone must bring me a big fat worm as a present, or you'll be crossed off my list. But worms make me sneeze, Blob whispered to Boo. I can't bring Isabella a worm. Isabella's big ears heard every word. I'm sorry, she told Blob. I must cross your name off my list. She took her pencil and drew a red line through Blob's name. Blob started crying and ran back to school. The other monsters looked down at the ground. No one looked at Isabella. No one said a word. Finally, it was the day of the party. Isabella made a big bowl of fried flies. She poured green goo juice into glasses. Her swimming pool was full of fresh, wet mud. Isabella waited for her friends to come to her muddy monster party. She waited and waited. But no one showed up. Where are all my friends? Isabella cried. Isabella went to look for everyone. She walked all the way to school. Suddenly, she heard monster screams. Her friends were playing at the playground. Isabella hid behind a bush. She watched the other monsters rolling down the hill. They all landed together at the bottom. Then they all ran up the hill and rolled down again. "This is so much fun," screamed Blob. "It's a lot better than a party with too many rules," shouted Boo. The monsters rolled down the hill faster and faster. They laughed and laughed. Now Isabella knew why her friends hadn't come to her party. Plop, plop, plop. Giant tears dripped from her 3 eyes. At last, Isabella came out from behind the bush. "My muddy monster party is no fun without muddy monsters," she told the others. "I'm sorry for being bossy. You don't have to do what I say. You don't have to bring any worms. You're all invited." Everyone cheered as Isabella tore up her party list. And then they ate it. And they're having a great time. And that's it.
Thank you very much. It looks like they got very muddy there at the end. Very muddy. And I don't know if I'm the only one here, but I'm suddenly hungry for fried flies. So I don't know, maybe we can go get some of those after this. And I guess next we're gonna go, so thank you very much, Lisa. Next we're gonna go from monsters to ghosts. And Stephanie, I believe you're going to take us there.
Okay. I might pass on the flies.
Oh, okay.
I might pass on
to
the
each their
flies.
own. To each
To
their
each
own.
their own. But I love both of those stories. Thank you so much for sharing them. So today I'm going to read Ghost Rider, which, as Matthew said, is co-written with Cecilia Popoulos Uyudave and is illustrated by Stephanie Wildman. And this is the third in a series of books with these twins. This is Big Brother Luis, and this is Roberto, and this is Flor. So, what will you be for Halloween? Big Brother Luis asked the twins. Halloween reminds me how Julio liked barking at the kids in costumes at the door, Flor sighed. So maybe I'll be a giant doggy bone, like the kind he used to chew. I miss Julio too, Roberto chimed in. Julio loved chasing rabbits. Maybe I'll be a bunny. We could honor him at the altar for Dia de los Muertos, not just with Halloween costumes, Luis told them. You don't sound sad, Luis, Flor and Roberto said at the same time. Jinx, Flor and Roberto shouted. Luis laughed. Now you can't speak until I say your name and unjinx you. But remember, Dia de los Muertos isn't all sad. And I do miss Julio. He was a good dog. Flor, said Luis, unjinxing her. Isn't Dia de los Muertos the day we celebrate those who died? Flor asked. Yes, it is, said Luis. Roberto? We feel joy that they were part of our lives, right? Roberto said. We do, replied Luis. Julio filled us with joy. Besides celebrating with offerings on the altar, we hang papel picado, which represents the wind. Let's make an ofrenda for the altar for Julio. We can include his favorite treats, agreed Roberto. I'll draw his picture, offered Flor. I imagine him playing with La Katrina, tugging at her long skirt. We should set out water for his journey, added Roberto. But remind me, who is La Katrina? You know, Flor poked her brother. She's the skeleton lady with a fancy hat. Yes, said Luis. She reminds us that we are all skeletons inside, even Julio. Let's write him notes, remembering the fun we had together. The next morning, the twins decorated sugar skulls, cut out papel picado, and drew pictures for the altar. What's this? Asked Flor, picking up a folded paper from under the table. It says, "Arf, arf, love Julio," Roberto read over her shoulder. You think Julio's ghost is writing us notes? Luis asked. Let's check the bedroom where he slept, Roberto called while he ran. And so while they're running to the bedroom, we see the altar that they have made, and we see some red pieces of paper here. We'll talk about illustration notes maybe later. Here they are in a wordless spread in the bedroom, looking and trying to see if there's anything else. And we see that red paper again that Big Brother Luis is holding. Nothing, declared Flor, bouncing back into the room. Nada, agreed Roberto. Wait, said Flor. Look, what is sticking out from the marigolds? Roberto took the note and read, Arf, arf, happy Halloween from Julio. Julio did like Halloween, said Flor. But when did he learn to write? She looked at Luis. Luis shrugged. Maybe La Katrina taught him. The altar looks good. What did you write for Julio? Roberto read his message. Miss you, Julio, but I'm not as sad as before. Remembering you flipping your nose under my hand to get petted makes me happy. Mine says, wish I could hug you. I liked holding your front paws and dancing with you, said Flor. In fact, I think I'll dress up as La Katrina and dance with a stuffed dog for Halloween. I can dress as El Catrine, Roberto announced. Like you said, Julio loved bones. What about you, Luis? Do you think I should be a writer who is a ghost? A ghost writer? Luis grinned. I don't know, answered Flor. Look what I found behind the altar. Did you write this note too? So we don't really know about what that note is on white paper. And at the end, we have them dressed up in their Halloween costumes as La Katrina and El Catrine, and Luis as a ghostwriter. And the back of the book has some directions for making papel picado. Okay. Share.
All right, muchísimas gracias, Stephanie. And, it is hard to write without opposable thumb, but I think that Julio was such a special dog that, I'm not surprised he was able to do it, right? And I live in the Mission, and you've just reminded me that Dia de los Muertos is actually coming up in less than a month, I think. Well, I guess a little more than a month. So thank you for that reminder, because it's always just amazing. And that's a great tribute to that amazing celebration. So thank you for sharing that. All right, so now we're going to talk with all three of you, and we're going to jump into the panel. And so I just want to start with the beginning, which is to say where each of you started your respective careers writing, or your prospective endeavors writing children's books. So Stephanie, why don't we just keep going with you, and can you just briefly share with us a little bit about how you got started in Kids Lit?
So I took a class. Having been a teacher all those years, there's a certain value in classes. I took a class from Maxine Rose Schur, who is now another Grotto member.
Yes.
And I learned so much from that. I've also taken a class from Lisa Lerner, who's a wonderful teacher, if any of you are looking for a class. And I know Britta's a great teacher too, but I don't know if she's teaching Kid Lit at the moment. But really from the class, you get the lay of the land and an idea of all the different types of books. And it was actually, I had an idea for a middle grade book, and it was Maxine who said, oh, that's a picture book, which I wouldn't have realized, because I thought you had to be an artist to do a picture book. I really didn't know anything. Turns out you can be an author, not an author illustrator.
Right. Maxine is actually a good friend, so I love that that's kind of who got you started. So the world it's a small world. Lisa, what about you? How did you get your start writing children's books?
I was trying to remember the answer to this question. I don't know it. I can't remember a time that I wasn't writing Kid Lit. I mean, I started writing as soon as I could hold a pencil. I was a frequent library goer. I just wanted to write these kinds of stories. I love cartoons. I love comics. I like fantasy stuff. And in my 20s, somehow I must have stumbled upon something and found the Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators and went to their conference, and started submitting, typing stuff on a little old Smith Corona. That's how old I am. And I got a call from Simon & Schuster to come in and do some writing for them. And this is a cautionary tale. I was a brat. I can go in at length about this horror story of how I turned them down. But it doesn't matter because somehow I ended up doing it anyway. So the universe had other plans. So I don't know. I just fell into it and I'm just so lucky.
That might be my favorite answer of the entire night. I don't know how I got started, but here I am. That works. All that matters is you're here now, right? Britta, what about you? How did you get started with writing children's books?
Yeah, so I think I got started like many some students that come up to me and say, I have an idea for a picture book, which mine was inspired by my own children, the first one. And I've been trying to write a novel. I've been taking classes, writing classes for a long time. Also with a former Grotto member, I started in her living room eons ago. But I just needed, I had this idea for a story and I needed, when anybody who's writing long form knows, we just need an instant gratification. And I thought I write this story. Little did I know, writing children's book is not an instant gratification process, as my people think. And that's kind of how I got started. And it's nice to write at a time when your kids are the age of the audience too, because you can read it back to them as well. But that's kind of how it started. Both my stories have very personal connection to my kids and my own experience with them.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, just because it's fewer words doesn't mean it's easier, right? It can look like that on the surface, but it's a different genre with its own rules, and maybe we'll get into that in a little bit. But Stephanie, what do you most like about writing children's lit?
I mean, I like all of it. I do. I love reading to children and hearing their feedback and their questions, which are amazing and wonderful. I like editing. As you said, I mean, every word matters in a children's book. The books I loved as a child that were longer those wouldn't be published today. They want a certain length. It has to be short, sweet. So, it's very challenging. Some people have compared it to poetry where every word matters. And of course, creating. I love creating.
Right, right. Lisa, what are your favorite aspects of writing kidlit?
Well, I do like that it's short and you can finish something. I mean, it is true. You don't just write it in an hour and it's done, but sometimes you do. Actually, and my adult novel took 5 years. So there is something to be said. I think someone else brought that up, that maybe Britta, the instant gratification. I mean, it is more instantaneous and you can finish something, even a draft, you can finish in an hour, actually. They're 500 words. I mean, they're very short, but it is rather like a poem. So every word does count. And the whole object of a picture book is very mindfully put together. And the other creator, who you may not ever meet, is also telling the story in their, using their medium of visual storytelling. So it's a really interesting process, becomes performative, and that's so fun when you actually get to perform it for your kid audience. And they're always so delighted. I mean, they just are.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
That's kind of great.
And each of you did a great job of performing your books, right? I mean, that's one thing with with writers who aren't even necessarily doing kidlit. I always say, if you're doing a reading, it is a performance. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that if it's not kidlit. So it's fun when you can really throw yourselves into it like the three of you did. Britta, what about you? What's your favorite part of writing this genre?
So I think it's a little bit of both what Stephanie and Lisa said. One is the editing process. I enjoy the editing more than the initial getting it on the page part. And the other really surprising favorite part for me has been working with the artist and seeing those characters and those images that you may have had in your head really come to life on the page, and seeing that process unfold, and also hearing from the artist telling that sub-story, like that subtext and what else is going on, because the pictures also tell a story that may not be in the words. And that's always been a super fun process for me, which also helps the editing, because both times we ended up cutting words and lines because we didn't need them because they were in the pictures.
Right, right. And we'll talk a little bit more about the relationship between the author and illustrator a little later, because that is a fascinating aspect of this genre that also distinguishes it. Lisa, what has surprised you about working in this genre? What surprised you?
That I actually make a living doing it. It's, I have the funnest job. That's such a surprise to me. Like I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I'm surprised also, I think, where ideas come from. And I guess I was listening to some podcast on creative intuition and how it's just like, you just have to like open up the channel, to let it all come to you. And it's always a shock to me when I figure something out, like a problem usually resolutions are the things I'm struggling most with. Sometimes initial premises, and it's always like a shocker. It's like, wow, I got it. How? It's like catching a whale. So.
Right, right. Stephanie, what has surprised you on your path of writing for children?
Well, so I really was, and we're focusing here mostly on picture books, but we are going to talk about some of the other types, I think, as well. But for picture books, I was shocked to learn the industry norm is really that there isn't contact between the author and the illustrator, although I've now learned that varies a lot between different publishing houses. But even in, my experience with Ghostwriter, that publisher believes in having a developmental meeting about the book with everybody to talk about it. What a concept. It's collaboration. Whereas my next book, Mary's Moving Day, I have never spoken with the illustrator. I have never even had an email with the illustrator. And I gather that is more the norm in the industry. And that surprises me because I think it's more fun if you get to work together.
More collaboratively, yeah. So Britta, one thing that I want to say all writers face, and usually we can't generalize like that, but it's hard to imagine there are many writers who don't face the imposter syndrome. So I'm just curious if that was something that you've experienced along the way, and if so, how you dealt with that.
Oh, you're throwing me something. I think we all writers do, especially when, you hold that book in your hands and you start going to schools and readings, and there's always a little bit of that, I think. I think with the kidlit part, what is humbling is when I don't know about Lisa and Stephanie, but most of my readings have always been crisscross applesauce. You go on their level, and it just makes it a little bit more of an enjoyable experience, because whatever imposter syndrome you may have, kids are just, I don't know, they're just much more embracing that way and much more honest and real. So you kind of like, oh, and you can see immediately the reaction in the kids' faces. And it's like, oh, okay, this is funny. I meant for this to be funny. So I think that has helped me when reading to kids to kind of just, just kind of embrace that and say, yeah, I did have an impact. And I've always said with my books, in particular, because they're tiny little bit more issue focused, is that if I can just have one kid say to their parent, hey, Mom, do you remember, Dad or Granny, do you remember that book you read to me, by the way? And have used that as a transitional, object for a conversation, for a more difficult conversation. So
Right. Lisa, the way you fell into this, maybe you're one of the rare writers who hasn't dealt with imposter syndrome, or is that something that you've also come up against?
Well, definitely, I would say for my adult writing, then because I don't feel like an adult. So maybe why I can write for kids is I just feel like how a kid approaches this. The kid doesn't have imposter syndrome. You say, here, kid, here's a pencil, write a story. And they're like, I will do that. I am an author. Let's publish it. And I feel a little in that spirit of things, because I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. And that's okay, because kids don't question it. And that's sort of tapping into that sort of, I don't know, point of view.
Right. No, I mean that isn't that a beautiful thing about being kids? Yeah, the imposter syndrome and so many of the issues that get in our way or can get in our way as we get older, kids don't have. They haven't learned learned to feel like imposters yet, and they just get to be creative. And so hopefully we can and these children's books can help us rekindle that in ourselves as adults. Stephanie, what about you? Have you encountered imposter syndrome along the way at any point?
I've certainly encountered it and felt it. I mean, I only just had cards made that said Stephanie Wildman, children's book writer, like in the last 6 months, even though I have 5 books out, but I finally felt like, okay, I could say that it's what I'm doing. But I really see imposter syndrome as sort of linked to this whole phenomenon of rejection, right? Because there's so many opportunities for rejection. Not just, I don't want to be your agent, I don't want to publish your book, but now I have a book, but I don't want you to be on my blog, or I don't want to interview you, or I don't want you to read with me at Lit Crawl, or whatever. There's just so many opportunities. So the imposter syndrome can sort of kick in when you get those rejections. But and I have a number of younger colleagues in my critique groups, and I try to explain to them, you just have to put it out there and see what happens. And sometimes good things happen.
Right, and know that
Sometimes
rejection
it's
is
not
part of
rejection.
it, right?
Yep.
And the
That's how you
rejection
know you're
is going to
doing
be
it.
part of it. Exactly, right, exactly. So let's talk about the writing process. Stephanie, how do you stay focused long enough? I mean, even though it is quote unquote only 500 words we're talking about, what we've also established, it's not just 500 words. There's a lot going on, a lot of rules and parameters and things like that. So how do you kind of stay focused enough to see a book through to the end?
Yeah, I have to say, focus is not one of my problems. I can be, if anything, getting less focused might be it. I mean, Maxine, my teacher, said you really have to work on one thing at a time, and that's not how I do it. I have a number of things sizzling on the stove, and so if one feels a little stuck or whatever, I just go to the next one, and then I come back to it. So.
But that's an interesting process though, right? Is rather than getting stuck because you're only working on one thing, you've got multiple things on the stove. So you're always moving forward, even if you're moving forward on different projects, right? So that's kind of an interesting way of going about that. What about you, Lisa? How do you, or is it an issue for you to stay focused and keep moving forward? And if so, how do you do that?
I'm a little bit like Stephanie, I have a lot of stuff going at once, but I write Kidlit for a job, and I get hired to do that. So I have to do it or I don't get paid. That's pretty motivating to stay focused.
That's very motivating right there. The check, yes.
The check motivates. Or any kind of other deadline. I wanted to apply to residency recently, and there was a deadline. You have to submit a picture book manuscript. And so I'm like, I better write something fast and get it in there. And so I did. Yeah, I think when I get stuck on something, I know I'm wise enough to know that I should leave it alone and walk away for a while and then come back to it with fresh eyes. I'm also of the school that says write a big hot mess fast, and that you forget that you even wrote it and you don't even know that you wrote it, and then come back to it a month later and you're like, wow, who wrote this? And you can really then sort of be a good editor for it. So that's little tricks and tips. I don't even know. Tongue twister.
Sound it out. Yeah,
Use your words, use your words.
Use your words. Yeah.
Those are my little tricks and tips that I've learned to teach myself along the way to keep myself, in line.
Yeah, and I think you also brought out something else, right? The deadline, right? In your situation, if you have a deadline and there's this expectation versus someone who might just be working on their own project and they might set their own deadlines, but that's different if you've got someone that's already said, we need this by then. I would assume that that's also motivating again, especially when there's a check associated with the deadline. What about you, Britta? Is focus and seeing something through to the end? How do you do that? How do you stay committed and get to the end?
So with shorter projects, with the short form, I get pretty obsessive actually. So when I have an idea, I can't let it go until I have a draft that I feel good enough to walk away from. Especially with these 2 books, they got so tired of these stories that they're like, Mom, I would change one word or one phrase, and it's like, it sounds the same. Like, no. I changed this one thing. What do you think? So I get a little obsessive, and I won't be able to, I literally will shut the door and it's like, nobody talk to me because I need to focus. I also work on a number of different other projects, but once I've honed in on something, I need to get it done.
Right. So what about writer's block? We talked about imposter syndrome, which is a really common thing that so many writers deal with. And we're talking about seeing things through to the end. But one thing that can get in the way of that is writer's block. And I think this is something else that so many, if not all writers encounter or have to deal with at some point. So Britta, do you come up against that? And if so, how do you get beyond it?
Not anymore, and I'll tell you why. I think writer's block is just an excuse not to write.
Ooh.
There's a lot of different ways you can move past that. And one of them, I'm a big believer in stream of consciousness type of writing, and just kind of, getting it in, not thinking, just writing. And that could mean if you're in a session and it's like you get stuck and really frustrated, to write through that. It's like, I'm frustrated, I can't move past it, you keep writing that, it will unblock, or whatever you want to call it. And there are times, the creativity is not flowing, or my imagination is not where I'd like it to be. I just went through a little bit of that lull. But what I do is I still try to journal, I still try to do the stream of consciousness, and I read more those times, because sometimes in that reading there will be a word or a phrase by another author that all of a sudden opens another door, and then I'm right back at it. So I don't have that anymore. Or I just go back and rewrite something I've written from a different perspective, for example. So in the Eunice story that you just heard, I would, there's other characters, I would just rewrite that one little scene from one of the other rhinos' perspective and see what comes up.
Just to get the juices flowing again and get beyond the block. What about you, Lisa? Do you ever come up against writer's block? And if so, how do you get beyond it?
I think I'm similar to Britta. I don't really have writer's block. I don't even have the luxury to have writer's block. But if I get stuck on a plot point, just things are dragging, I'll read poetry. That because I love language and the imagery, it's always really surprising to me what I read in a poem, and that'll jolt me out kind of, or I'll go back to one of my favorite books and I'll get really excited and I'll be like, I can do that too. Or I take a walk. I rarely can compose sitting at a desk. I seem to be only doing it when I'm away from my desk, walking somewhere, doing the dishes, doing something on anything but write, sitting here to write. I almost never write at the desk.
Yeah. I love that. Stephanie, what about you in writer's block?
Yeah, I also, because I do so many projects at the same time, it's more an issue of finding time to write and juggling all the other responsibilities, although that can be an excuse. I mean, our mutual friend Bridget Quinn likes to talk about creative procrastination. So, sometimes even if I'm not writing, I might be walking, I might be reading, I might be in my meditation practice. And, so I don't know, it's sort of always in the background. So I don't view it so much as a block. I'm more trusting of the process.
Right. So Lisa, can you tell us a little bit, or I'm just calling on Lisa, but if someone else wants to chime in, that's fine too. But let's just talk for people who might be on this Zoom at this event interested in becoming kidlit authors. Can you give us an overview? And I'm just thinking because you're specific, this is your job. Can you give us I mean, it's everybody's job here, but I mean, you're, like we've established, you're doing a 9-to-5 sort of thing. Can you give us an overview of the different categories in the industry relative to kidlit?
Yeah, I mean, I might be dovetailing on another question, but there is two different markets, and that's educational publishing and trade. So I do work mostly in educational publishing. And so that can become more of a job. And then trade, in educational publishing, you're really more pitching yourself rather than a specific project. And in trade, you're pitching a specific book that you're querying, that you're going to agents or publishers directly with a one book project, or maybe multiple, but generally it's one. And with me, I sort of, or anyone in educational publishing, you're pitching yourself as a writer. Hey, I can write sciencey stuff. I can write fiction. I can write biography. I can write whatever. And then you might submit some samples, and you get hired, and then they kind of give you, sometimes they'll give you the topics. They'll say, write us a book about, I have one I did on roller coasters or whatever, because they wanted to teach kids about physics, but using something fun like roller coasters. But then sometimes, like the job I'm doing now, I'm writing 72 short books for a major educational publisher, and in like 4 months. And basically, I'm coming up with those topics myself. I mean, my editor's helping me too, because it's a lot of books. They're little books, but they're each one is a thing. And with art, and in this case, you write the art specs or spec photos. So it's a whole different process than trade. Am I answering the right question?
Sure. And let me just check in with Britta and Stephanie, though. Any other thoughts on the distinctions that if you were a new author coming into this space, so Lisa just made the great distinction between trade and educational. Are there any other genres, ways it's broken up insofar as sort of sub-genres? Now I'm the one who has to sound it out. Within Kidlit, or any other distinctions sort of along those lines that if you were a new author coming into this space, you might want to be aware of, Britta or Stephanie?
Yeah, well, there's obviously the picture books, which we just shared, and then there's the middle grade, and then there's young adult, and then there's the crossover from there. But to answer your first question, like to kind of get into it is to read that genre, like that you want to write about. Read lots and lots. I tell, students that come in, I want to write a picture book, like, but what is the last picture book you actually read? Go to the library, sit down, crisscross applesauce on those low shelves and go through them. And there's different themes and Stephanie and Lisa can maybe chime in on that, but there's, with the picture book, it's kind of like, you're finding kind of a little bit who you are and who am I kind of, and then middle grade is kind of like, who am I in this world that's around me, what's happening? And then in young adult is more like, who am I in relation to other people? Like there's more that independence kind of. So these are kind of common themes that you will find in those specific genres. So read them.
If
So
I
if
can
you are right
elaborate,
in the
I'm sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
Go ahead,
No,
Stephanie. I think,
go ahead.
yeah.
I was just going to elaborate a little bit. I think of it going up in age, starting with board books, even before picture books.
Oh, yeah.
Although some picture books get made into board books, but board books are aimed at, the kids who are chewing on the book more than reading the book. But it is still something that can be read to them. And then, as Britta said, picture books, those are usually marketed, and this is all trade side, because I don't know anything about the world that Lisa's inhabiting in education, but picture books are generally marketed at around ages 3 to 8. And then there are chapter books, which are kind of your learning to read books that often have certain vocabularies that are indicated. And those tend to have very short chapters, no more than 10 of them. They're pretty thin, and they often come in series, and they're often written in-house in the publisher. So it's harder to break in, I think, with chapter books, although I think they'd be fun to write. And then, as Britta said, middle grade, young adult, then there's sort of upper middle grade and young adult. I think of young adult as that's when you get sex, drugs and rock and roll. The other ones are, there's a little more age of innocence, but really all these categories can be fluid. You're just in the query trying to give them an idea of where they're going to put it on the shelf in the bookstore,
Right.
or where they're going to put it on the shelf in the library.
Right. And we'll get to querying and interacting with agents in a second. But I'm curious, again, keeping sort of in this vein of if I were someone who wanted to get started in this space, how would I know? Let's say I have an idea for a children's book, Stephanie, and I have this idea. How do I know if it's got legs? How do I know if I have a good idea? What are the sort of the criteria that you could say, yeah, that's a great idea for a children's book?
I couldn't do that, certainly when I started, without the help of critique partners. And I know we're getting to that later, but I think, we all think, oh gosh, this is such a great idea. And then you research it and you see there are all these other ones. there are probably 3 or 4 Dia de los Muertos books that just came out within the last month as well. So it's not that there can't be others, but what is it that makes yours special or yours publishable? And that's where the critique partners really come in to help you
Right.
to say, you know, this is something, but have you thought about that?
Yeah. So getting some external feedback on whether the idea is good or not. Britta, any thoughts on that, on how you know whether an idea might have legs?
Yeah, and I think just piggybacking off that is to understand what that age group is going through. What are they curious about? What do they need? What do they want? And I think most importantly, I think we have sometimes as adults a tendency, well, we want to teach the kids something. And they can't be preachy and teach something. It has to be something that the kids can relate to, the character or the issue that, you know, is being presented, I think. And that's, you know, comes down to any kind of writing character really matters. And then understanding who your audience is in those genres, I think is just, I said that earlier, is really super important. Because getting down on their, like literally getting down on the picture book level and, you know, seeing how, and I tell that student sometimes, like, when is the last time you went down on your knees and looked at the world from that level, what the table looks like? And that sounds maybe very primitive, but it's true because goes back to point of view and perspective. So that's kind of where I would start. And if it's a story, as Stephanie said, like there's lots of different stories. There's a gazillion Halloween stories, a gazillion, you know, holiday stories. But as Stephanie said, what's your unique angle? What's different about this character and their experience and their individual journey?
Right. Thank you. What about you, Lisa? Because you're being given this assignment, in this case, write 72 books really quickly, which, you know, I'll be sending lots of energy and focus your way. But so I don't know, do you not really have this issue because you're already kind of being told this is what we're looking for? Or are you having dialogues where you still have to figure out whether this is a good idea? And if so, what are the criteria that help you to know, yeah, this is good, we should proceed with this idea?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I teach people how to write for kids. So people pitch me their ideas all the time. So I have little rubrics that I use. First, I think you need to decide what category you're writing for. Is it picture book? Is it middle grade? Is it YA? And I also often make people write a little log line or a pitch so they can articulate what they're actually trying to say. And it's sort of like marketing copy. And it's not a waste of time to do it because it actually clarifies what you're actually trying to do. And you can sort of then test it and maybe even test it out on some people. Would you read this book? Does this sound cool to you? But also, if it's good and you write it well, you'll use it in your query letter, and maybe the marketing team might even use it to sell it if it's that good. But it really does sort of clarify the main character's want or the concept of the book and the stakes. If there's a character who wants something, like you can see it all there before you have to write the whole thing. And, you know, there's elements that I think across all genres, you know, work in sort of traditional Western storytelling, that our brains are just wired for this stuff. And so, you know, having memorable characters, having deep emotion, having suspense. And in a picture book, you know, that suspense could just be, you know, will the baby go to bed? That can carry the whole story. And if everybody's freaking out, including the baby, of course, about not going to bed or going to bed, we're very invested in this journey, and we've got to keep turning those pages. Is that baby finally going to go to sleep or what? And that'll keep us invested. And that's a very, that brings up another thing. It's like, what is fun? What is it? What was Britta saying? Like, what relates to kids? What do they care about? Bedtime is a big one. And there are lots of books about going to bed and all of that. But yes, you know, what's timely? How can you make it fresh? Something we haven't seen before.
Right.
And I think the big idea of a book or a takeaway is also super important. And it's not to preach or teach. It's sort of like when you sneak the vegetables into the chocolate cake, you know, the beets, like they're in there, but we don't know it. And that's kind of how you have to think about your little message or takeaway that you want to just like sneak it in, and lots of chocolate and sprinkles.
I love chocolate. I can never have too much. I had chocolate right before this event. I mean, yes to chocolate and sprinkles. Britta, Stephanie mentioned a little while ago, critique groups and getting that sort of feedback as one way to sort of assess whether an idea has legs, for example. Other than critique, or in addition to critique groups, before you are ready to submit a book or a manuscript to an agent or to a publisher, however you're going to go, what other venues or outlets might there be, or ways to get help? So critique groups are a great way. What other ways can you get help before you're ready to submit a manuscript?
So I was lucky with both of my books because my kids were just in that age group at the time I was writing. I actually called up the teachers at my school and said, "Hey, I have this story. Can I test it out on your students?" So really test it out on your actual audience. I got to do that, which was really fun and helpful because I then asked them, "What do you think?" And that feedback kind of helped with the editing process. There's also, and I don't know if that's going too far, but there's a lot of other like online forums and professional organizations that you can get involved with that are very supportive. That is a wider net of critique groups. I can put that in the chat later if that's helpful. But yeah, just test it out on your audience, I think is a big one. And Stephanie, I think you've had that experience too, right? Where you can read, where you were able to test it out on the target audience.
In my case, it's grandchildren because my grandchildren are 7, 8, 9, and 10. And I had a really great experience reading to the one, he was 7 at the time, because I'm working on a middle grade book. And so I went to him and I said, "I'm writing something with no pictures. And so I'd really like to know if you're bored," because he was only used to pictures, right? So I said, "I'm going to read you 2 pages and I want you to stop me if you're bored." So I read the 2 pages and he said, "Go on." And I read 2 more pages and he said, "Go on." And I got to the end because these are short chapters. I said, "You didn't stop me." He said, "Well, Grandma, I was going to stop you when you did this, but then you did that, but you need more action." I said, "Okay, that's really helpful feedback." And then he said, "And I have an idea for another Flor, Roberto, and Luis book." I said, "Okay, Simon, what's your idea?" You asked Matthew, "How do we know if it's a good idea or not?"
Right.
He had a brilliant idea. His idea is that they should write a story. I mean, that's Shakespeare, right? The story within the story. So that book is under contract and he's my co-author because it was his idea.
Well, that is very generous of you and very honest of you, and good for him. He's getting a really, really early start in his career, it sounds like.
His first grade teacher was very happy when we told her that she's the one who got him started writing.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So Britta, now you've done the work, you've gotten the feedback, you've gotten the beta reader feedback or beta listener feedback, I guess, in this instance, and you want to go to an agent. Can you tell us a little bit about the relationship between an author and an agent, and what people who are contemplating getting into this space might want to keep in mind about that relationship if they're going to pitch an agent?
So once you get to the point of, that there's a query process, but once you get to a point where you actually have a conversation with an agent who's interested in signing you, my advice would be to really have a very honest and lengthy conversation as much as you can get out of them. And really, it's kind of a little bit like dating because it's you kind of marrying this person and you want to make sure they love all of you. And I'm saying that because in my case, I did not, I was, I made a rookie mistake with my first agent. I did not ask enough questions because I was just so excited to be signed. And when I pitched this book I just read today, there was, we were out in submission on another book that she signed me on, which actually is still slumbering on my hard drive. She said to me, this is a really great book and I'm sure it's going to do well, but I'm not the person to sell this book. And I was a little taken aback, and I asked her why. And she said, well, I can't honestly tell kids and that they are not what they're born to be. And at the time, I had written the story more as an idea of like, be who you are. This is, whatever you want to be, that's who you can be. And she had read it very differently, which then prompted me. It's like, oh, I can, you're telling me I can't. I'm like, I'm going to lean into that, which then ended up leading to two endorsements by Jazz Jennings and Maya Kobe for this particular picture book. But we parted ways in a very friendly manner. We had a very honest conversation saying, this is just because I said to her, I need you to love all of me and all my work and believe in my art and what I'm trying to communicate. And so my advice for everybody is to really ask the hard questions, because it goes both ways.
Right, right. And Lisa, I know that, again, you're doing the educational stuff, but you also, at one point, I think probably did query, and like you said, you teach and you work with people who are looking for agents. Can you give us just a really quick high-level overview of how I would find an agent if I'm, I've just got my first book and now I'm ready to start shopping at? How would I find an agent, just at a high level?
Google. Yeah, you want to Google agents who, see what they're repping, find, go stalk them, listen to their TED Talks, their webinars, their interviews. If you can attend something, that's a way to get out of the slush pile. A lot of times people are doing this now, where you attend a webinar that they're giving, and then they'll open up a submission window just for the attendees. And because they're getting 200 queries a week minimum, and a lot of them close down, they just, so you want to don't waste your time, do your homework. Really study and sometimes like the manuscript wish list website, sometimes those manuscript wish lists are out of date and they're not looking for those things anymore. So you really need to do your homework and dig, go on the dreaded X or whatever, or wherever they all are, and see what they're repping. And you can join Publishers Weekly or Marketplace or launch
Marketplace, yeah. Marketplace, yeah.
For like $25, if you're really ready to go out, spend your $25 for just that 1 month to do the search for the agents and find out who's open and what are they repping and what deals did they just do and that sort of thing. So it is a project. It's very time consuming, but it's a waste of everyone's time to just send it out to, oh, here's a children's lit agent. I'm a children's lit author. Let's go. It doesn't work like that. And I wouldn't query everybody at once either. If you make a list of 50 people, start in batches, 5 to 7, so you don't burn all your bridges at once, because maybe you're going to get some good feedback. Maybe. And that could change the whole thing. You go, oh, wow, that's a great idea. I'm going to rewrite it and send it to these new people. So.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. So, Britta, let's say I've just followed Lisa's prudent advice and I paid the $25 for Publishers Marketplace and I got the lunchtime emails and I found an agent that I do want to submit to, or I found 5 agents to whom I want to submit. Can you tell me a little about the process and things I might want to avoid? And Lisa touched on this a little bit, but any other mistakes to avoid in the actual submission process?
Well, the first thing, if I could just flip that question, what I would do is, as Lisa just said, with the research, really, if there's something that an agent may have broadcast somewhere that relates to your work, to put that into your letter. Like, I noticed you commented, we need more these kind of themed books, for example. Put that, be very personal on your approach. The other thing I recommend doing is, especially for kid-lit authors in their query letters, and Lisa and Stephanie, you may have a different opinion, but I like seeing that first line just showcase your voice a little bit from the book, so you can kind of play with that and give the agent a little bit more taste of your voice and what it is about. So I would do that. I agree with Lisa, go in batches, don't send everything all at once. And be brief and be personal. Like, why are you reaching out? And it sounds so simple, but it's really true. You have to do your homework.
All right, so do your homework. But Stephanie, there are a lot of publishers out there, small presses, that for whom you don't have to have an agent. You can go direct. There, you can just go straight to them, and you don't need the person in between to sort of open that door. Can you tell us a little bit about what that process is like, working directly with a publisher, going straight to a publisher?
Sure. I mean, again, it really depends on what you want. An agent can give you access to some publishers that will only talk to you if you have an agent, and that would include the bigger publishers. But there are, I would say, 80 to 100 small presses that will take submissions from unagented writers. And there are lists you can find. I think Bitsy Kemper is one who has a list of that in her blog post. And so again, it's the same thing. You need a query letter, as Britta said. You want to personalize it. You want to give them some idea of why this should be a book now. They talk about the universal wisdom, having comp in it. You know, it's so ironic because they want to know, why is this book new and different, but tell us 3 other books exactly like it that are selling.
Exactly.
So, you know, so you have to walk that kind of fine line between, yes, this is new, but there's a market for this kind of thing, you know, and they
Right.
want to know a little bit about you. There's some very good blog posts about how to do query letters, again, when you do the research. And that's not that different than when you're querying agents, but then again, sending it out in batches is just good advice, I think.
Okay. So let's go back to something we talked about in the beginning a few times. We started going in this direction and then didn't necessarily go all the way there. Or maybe we did. Maybe there's nothing left to say, but that's unlikely. Britta, I'm just curious, can you tell us a little bit more about the relationship between the kidlit author and the illustrator? I mean, what we have already heard has been fascinating in the sense that I can't remember, I think it was Stephanie who said there was one illustrator she's never seen, or maybe that was Lisa, never even seen or even emailed with, versus sometimes you actually do collaborate with them. So any other insight into that? Sounds like very highly variable relationship between author and illustrator in this domain.
So I was lucky. I actually had the same illustrator for both of my books. And I went direct to an independent small press for the second one because, you know, I lost my agent over that book. I'm like, I'm going to do it anyway, and I'm going to do it better. But as far as working with her, it was from the moment I sent her the story, she sent me that first sketch, which is now the cover of the book. I knew immediately this is the cover. And for me, that relationship was super important to have that dialogue. I cannot imagine not having any interaction. That must be super weird. But so I'm curious to hear about that experience, actually. But it just is joyful because we had quite a few calls where she would put up stuff like, what do you think? And it was a collaborative effort. And then the editor then came in as well, and then there was just a lot of different people, and we all had way too much fun in the process, actually. So I can't imagine not doing that. And that was half the fun for me in creating these books.
Right. Lisa, thoughts on that?
Yeah, so in educational publishing, you actually get to write very detailed art specs where you say,
Oh, wow.
I want this kid to be this tall and wear this striped shirt and, you know, whatever. And so the illustrators draw exactly what I say, and that's really fun to see that come alive. But there are tricks that you can, you know, I'm all about the tricks. There are tricks where you can steer the text in such a way that the illustrator, who you may never meet, will be led to sort of draw what you want. And one of the things that, you know, when a picture book is sort of an editor is excited and thinking they might want to acquire it, they need to bring it to their team. And in a bigger house, it could be 200 people or something ridiculous. And then they have to pitch it. And sometimes there's an illustrator there. And if the illustrator doesn't feel like they could draw anything, the whole project just dies.
Wow.
So you want to write visually. And if you are clever enough in how you do it, you can sort of have a bit more control. You know, also part of the art that happens in a picture book is the words themselves. They can kind of be big, colorful things that swirl and they can become the art. And that's another way in sort of that picture book writers cue the performers through punctuation and font size and type of font and mixing fonts and coloring fonts. And there's so many fun ways that you can kind of control things, even though you may literally never have any say on the illustrations. And it does vary, because there are people like Stephanie's, had some say, right? And that, some of the smaller houses will ask you, what illustrators do you like? Give us some samples. Let's see. So
Right.
they may ask you that sort of thing, but the bigger
Right.
ones usually don't.
Yeah, I have
By
a
the
friend
way-
who just published. Go ahead, Britta.
I know, so I was like, Lisa, I actually did that with some of my language. Like I did bigger font sizes, and that became like the ta-da, like those kind of things.
Mhm.
Yeah.
There's also
Uh-huh.
limited acceptability of art notes in the trade side, that sometimes they're called action notes, that you can say something that wouldn't be clear just from the words. So as I was reading Ghostwriter, I highlighted the red paper. The art note said something about the notes, the early notes are all on red paper and the last note is on white paper, so as to distinguish them. And it didn't have to be red and white, but just the idea that, there was this idea that maybe Julio was writing these notes, but then they found a different kind of note. Who wrote that if Luis was really writing the first ones and not Julio? So it was just,
Un
little
misterio.
Halloween.
Yes, yes. And Stephanie, were you the one who earlier said that you did work on one book where you never even emailed with the illustrator, never had any contact whatsoever? Was that
That's
you or was that
correct.
Lisa?
No, that was me. Everything
Yeah.
went through the editor who controlled the reins on that, and did show us some sketches. But I had a co-author. It's not the royal we, and so we were able to give some feedback on the sketches, and then we saw final art, but there was never really a conversation.
Yeah.
And
But you
it's
had
just
an
much fun.
opportunity.
It's not
You
as
had an
much fun.
opportunity. You were able to give some feedback,
Well, we gave the feedback to the editor.
editor.
So, there was never that direct contact, and I know that feels differently because I did have that opportunity, in the series I did that I was reading from.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. I have a friend who just published a children's book, and she was able to choose the artist from I think 3 that the publisher gave her. So she got to have some input, but then once that artist was off and running, I don't think she had a lot. And then I do have another friend, children's book author, who didn't see the art until it was published, which is I just can't even imagine that. But let's move on. In the interest of time, as we're getting ready to, we're quickly approaching our Q&A and want to make sure we have time for that. But again, going back to 4 aspiring kid-lit authors, what resources are available? And again, we might have touched on this a little bit, but for researching agents, editors, publishers, Lisa, you said Google. We've talked about, we mentioned some resources, but Britta, are there any other resources to which you would direct potential or prospective new kid-lit authors?
So there is a great book by Anne Whitford Paul, right? It's called Writing Picture Books, that I really would recommend. There you go. That's it.
There it is.
There it is. It is a great resource. It is so many tips and tricks in there. And that's a good starting point that I would recommend. Another one that is online that also has a community around it is 12 by 12 picture
book challenge.
Picture book challenge. Yes, thank you. Julie Hedlund does a really great job with that forum. And there's so many resources and you cannot not learn in that space. So those are my 2 biggest recommendations.
Okay. Lisa, anything to add? You're obviously a fan of the book because you have it right there. Anything else to suggest?
Yeah, I think it's called The Magic Words by Cheryl Klein. That's quite good. And the 12 by 12 people, Julie Hedlund, they do a podcast. I think it's called Picture Book Summit or something. I listen to it. I am like learning from them. I am like, wow, some really great stuff. I think they might even have a YouTube or something that goes along with it. join SCBWI. That's the Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. They have a ton of free, I think it's like $80 a year, but they do have a lot of free resources and free webinars. And anybody who's anybody in the business, from the most best-selling, author to total beginner, had never even written a word, everybody's part of it. And then there's local chapters that meet in person and online. And now, because everyone is online, you can go to other people's workshops from anywhere in the world, I think. And there's lists of all of it. And it's really a great community. And you do need to build that community. That's a big part of it.
Right.
I have one book here that I just think is great. And it's called Fortunately. It's by, I guess his name is Remy Charlip. It's an older book. I don't know when it's published, but I say, look at this book because it's really got the rhythm of storytelling in it. I use this exercise in all my classes, fortunately, unfortunately. It's basically, that's the format of this book. Something great happens and then something bad happens, something great happens, something bad happens. And it really kind of gets you in the mindset of storytelling. And it's really short and skinny. You can read it in 5 minutes. And I always come back to this book to remind me of the rhythm of storytelling. And really it mirrors life because, that's what keeps things interesting.
That is indeed what keeps things interesting. Stephanie, anything to add with regards to resources we might not have touched on?
Yeah, I did put in the chat SCBWI and 12 by 12 picture book challenge. I would add to that Kidlit 411, which has both a website and a Facebook page. There are amazing resources. That one is free. The other ones cost not a whole lot, but a little bit. But Kidlit 411 has sections on how to write this, how to do your query letter, how, it's a really great resource. And I would also add the Authors Guild, because especially if you're not using an agent and going right to a publisher, they're going to give you a contract. And if you're not trained as a lawyer or doing law in that field, the Authors Guild offers, they will review the contract for you for its
Wonderful.
members.
Wow.
So it's a good thing to be a part of.
Right, great to know. Lisa just touched on community. Stephanie, you just touched on community. Britta, anything, and we're all members of the Grotto, which is just a really, really important, wonderful community supporting writers. Britta, any other places, again, in the context of Kidlit, where if I were getting started, I might be able to go find my community?
I think, through these networks with the local chapters is where you often find that your local independent bookstores oftentimes have little, classes or readings or little groups that you might want to seek out. And the libraries, I think, do more and more of these kind of events too. So just, hang out in those sections as well, but you never know. There's probably another writer looking through stuff and doing some research.
Go to your libraries and local bookstores. Lisa, anything to add relative to community that we haven't necessarily touched on?
Not really. I mean,
Okay.
I think, there's lots of resources out there. Just, there is something, I'm not associated with them, but I think it's called Storyteller Academy, and I did it just because I want to check something out. And I'm going to just say, like, in the interest of transparency, I paid $30 for the month and then I quit. But I didn't need any more. I just needed one thing. But it gave me so many resources. And had I needed more, I could have continued. Lots of videos, lots of classes, lots of great resources, handouts. I don't know them, but I just know that was a good resource for me. So yeah, definitely
Wonderful.
just find your community.
Okay. Thank you. And Stephanie, last but not least, before we go into Q&A, are there any community sort of recommendations we haven't touched on?
Well, I found my critique group through my local SCBWI chapter, and that was really the beginning of growing community. And even though I'm not that much of a social media proponent, I have to say that I learned about the Writers Grotto from social media, and that was how I applied to it. So dabbling a little bit in social media, not going off the deep end, I think that you can find some things out that way.
Right. And there are always conferences and retreats and those sorts of things as well.
And the writing contests as well,
and
pretty
contests.
much every month, and that you can learn people, you're not really meeting them, but it's a kind of a community.
All right.
Yeah.
Go
Oh,
ahead,
sorry.
Britta.
Now that you talked about that, there's also a great magazine, like Kidlit magazine, Story Monster. They have sometimes little resources and things in there too. So just it's out there. You just have to dig a little.
All right, dig a little, but what we're going to do right now is dig into the questions. And so thank you, Britta, Lisa, and Stephanie very much for all of this. We could go another several hours, I think, but hopefully we've covered a lot of good angles, but we want to open it up now to questions. And I think Michelle was curating those for us. Michelle, do we have any questions? And if not, now would be the time. I haven't looked at the chat because I've been looking at other things. Michelle?
No questions yet, although there were some questions, but you guys were so great. This was so comprehensive that you kept answering people's questions as they were entering them into the Q&A. So no questions yet, but we'll stand by a little bit. How about this though? As you were starting out in your careers as children's authors, what's the worst piece of advice you got that you hopefully didn't follow?
That's a good one.
That is a good one.
Well, I'll chime in because it goes back to this not so successful agent relationship. Was the first thing I had actually talked with somebody else about it and said, well, just kind of maybe rewrite the story. And I said, no, I'm not going to rewrite the story. I'm going to just keep it just the way it is. I think sometimes just try and stay true to yourself and what you're trying to put out there, and the version of you that you want people to know about. I would say that.
And Britta, what was it, if I may ask, in that situation that you knew to sort of hold your ground? Because we do need to be open from outside or to outside criticism sometimes, right? That's why we have our critique groups and our beta readers and we get together in these groups. So how do you know when to hold your ground versus to be more open to making changes like that? Just out of curiosity.
Well, I think this was a very fundamental, the part of the story of Be Who You Are was.
Oh, in that specific example.
That was the essence of the story, and I wasn't going to waver on that. Now, the story that I was signed for that has not been published was a fractured fairy tale. And our interaction did make it better. Like we went through a few revisions before we went out on the editor's process, like publishing process. And then because of this whole situation being severed, didn't kind of see the light of day yet. But it was in that process of going back and forth, it did make it better. So you just, you need to know what's important to you and why you wrote this in the first place.
Right. Michelle, did I see a question come up?
Yeah, there was a really good question in the chat, actually, which was, how do you access your creativity? And are there practices you've learned that have helped?
Hey, Lisa, would you like to take that one to start, and then we'll go around?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I get inspiration from everything. I think that, you have to sort of see the whole world as your little stockpile of shiny objects to steal. Writers, we're like magpies. That's what we do, right? We steal shiny objects. So everything is material. Your whole life is one big creative funnel of stuff. And you just have to be open to seeing it that way, I think. And I mean, go look at art, go listen to music, go see dance, talk to other creators about their process. I think always sort of stay juicy and creative in some fashion, whether it's, fooling around with a recipe book or sewing, gardening, everything's creative to me. It's how you think of it.
Right. Stephanie, how do you connect with creativity and maintain open that connection?
So here we are all at a screen, but I use the analog type. I find if I'm actually writing with my hand, that it makes a big difference. And I've got all these notebooks and journals all over the place. And I try to do the practice that's called morning pages. And there's blog posts and things about that. And you can vary it. You can do it, 5-minute sprints. You can write 3 pages and don't stop. They're all different ways, but trying to stay connected to that regularly, that doesn't mean you can't take a day off, but regularly, coupled with reading, I find keeps me in the best sponge-like. I mean, I agree with Lisa, the whole world, there it is.
Right. If we're paying attention and open to it. What about you, Britta? How do you plug in and stay plugged in?
Yeah, I think it's the mind-body connection and really trying. I've become more, reading is definitely one of them, but for me, it's really trying to experience the world again. As Stephanie said, we're here on the screen. I do like, I write a lot of stuff by hand in a journal as well. And really trying to pay attention to all my senses as well. I've, especially in the last couple of years, I've become really tuned into that. And noticing, noticing smells and, overhearing conversations,
Yes,
the
the
art
art
of
of noticing.
noticing.
Yeah.
There you go.
It's a great book.
And
Speaks to that.
yeah, and you mentioned, I think, Lisa, earlier, the poetry, and I think poets do that so well. They pay attention to things that we sometimes just take for granted or overlook. And so that's where I get a lot of inspiration from. I read a poem every day with my morning coffee.
Wonderful. Michelle, I think I saw something about the marketplace. I'm just seeing the
That was
the
a good one. I
fading
think so
bubble.
too.
Yes.
How has the market for children's books changed over the course of your career, and where do you see it going in the next 10 years? Publishers and consumers.
Stephanie, would you like to start with that one?
Well, my career in children's book writing is pretty brief, since I just started in 2018. So I haven't seen a ton of changes, thus far. I feel like I've just been learning the lay of the land, and I haven't felt like that land has been pulled out from under me. I hope it means that we might see more co-authoring. I'm a big fan of co-authoring. I do a lot of collaborative work. And that's something in most genres of writing that's not that expected or welcomed, and I'm not sure why. So I hope that's a change we'll see. But honestly, I don't know.
What about you, Lisa? You said you've been in this space 25 years, so you've seen some changes.
Changes in the trade market, or what are we talking?
How specific did we get, Michelle, with that question? Could you repeat?
They asked for how has it changed for publishers and for consumers? So,
I mean, I'm always hearing this, but I think I've been hearing this forever about how competitive it is and how overworked everyone is. And, I think when I published my adult novel, I paid zero attention to the market. And had I done that, had I paid attention, it might have just like totally stifled me, because somebody gave me some figure of like, oh, there's 100,000 books published a year or whatever, novels. Like, I thought, well, how possibly could I ever get in there? Like, I didn't think about that. And I think it's best to just, you've got to sort of keep an eye on like what the trends are, but then don't let it overwhelm you. Because just write your story, and if it's a good story, it'll get out there one way or another. I'm also a big fan of going the independent route. It's getting a lot more cred, and you can get reviews, and you can win awards, and you can get vetted by, this independent author website has various things on it. And, you're not going to get rich making picture books. So what is your goal? Why do you want to publish traditionally? You're going to wait forever. You're going to get 100 rejections out of the gate. Why not just make a book? Hire your own illustrator, make a book, give it to your friends and family, throw it in the little free libraries, do whatever you want, go do readings. I mean, think about what your goal is in publishing, because publishing and writing are really two separate animals. And I love writing and I hate publishing.
I don't think you're alone. Britta, any thoughts on how things have changed either in the publishing itself or as on the consumer side of things since you've been involved in this or paying attention to this?
I started the same time as Stephanie did, and I second what Lisa said, like, why are you writing this story? Why is it important to you, number one, and what is your end game for doing so, number one. But number two, I think what I heard, and if I look at some kind of the books that are out now, I think if there's anything that has changed, is the attention span. the word count seems to, get less and less. If you look at some older picture books in particular, and even now chapters in middle grade, like they're getting shorter and shorter. So if anything, I think that may have changed a little bit, just our attention span in general. And that is reflected, I think, a little bit in the literature as well.
That makes sense. Michelle, I think we have time for one more, maybe two more questions, depending on the questions. We've got 5 minutes.
I was thinking of combining two questions. So someone asks, how do you write a kid's book that requires research for a topic that you're not an expert? But on the other side, how do you make sure you're writing from the eyes of a child and keeping them engaged in the story when you're trying to get more arduous concepts across?
So Britta, you touched on this notion of getting down at the table level, right? So that you could be sort of more in the experience of the child. Any other thoughts along those lines and the lines of the questions?
The first thing that came to mind on that second part of the question was language. How you manipulate and use the language to engage the children, not to dumb it down, but at the same time make it something that they can relate to. I think that's where the poetry and the art form comes in when writing for children. And what was the first part of that question?
The research.
The research. So, well, research, you can really go down a rabbit hole with that stuff. I think it goes back to what Lisa said earlier about have a log line. What's your spine? What is it that you're actually trying to communicate? And stick with that. And anything that you research that doesn't directly connect to that spine might be another book.
Okay. Stephanie, any thoughts on research and or writing from the perspective of your target audience?
So picture book biographies had a big moment a couple of years ago. And one thing that people have said, was going back to the other question about trends, is that now the market's saturated in picture book biographies. I don't know if that's true or not, but picture book biographies take a lot of research. So if you're talking about research for a picture book, there's a lot of nonfiction picture book examples out there, and you can email me and I'll send you some if that's, of interest. But if you're talking about a longer book, middle grade or young adult, I think you might want to write a proposal before you write the whole book. At least that's generally how it would work, I think, with nonfiction books. You'd write a book proposal and try to get that picked up. So, you want a sample chapter or 2 or 3, but you don't want to write the whole book and then have someone say, well, we only want this written by a PhD in this area, so you want to feel that out before you do all of that research, I think. But even picture books can take a lot of research.
Yeah, thank you. Lisa, any thoughts as we wrap things up on either aspect or both aspects of that question or questions?
Well, hang out with kids so you can get into their little minds. There's a great, I think it's on YouTube. It's called Recess Therapy. Do you watch it? I've watched it.
I've heard about it. Yeah, I haven't actually watched the full thing. Yeah, but yes.
It's a friend of mine, friend of mine's friend has this son, and he interviews kids in Brooklyn, and about big topics, hard topics, arduous topics, death, I don't know, all kinds of things. You were like, wow, I can't believe he's talking to these 4-year-olds about this. And they say their thing, and you get their language and their syntax and the way their minds work. It's like, it blows my mind every time. So, if you can't hang out with live kids, at least you can sort of watch them, on the screen and see how they are in the wild.
Wonderful. I think that's great advice. And on that note, we're going to wrap up, and I'm going to turn it over to Michelle. But first, I want to say thank you, Britta, Lisa, Stephanie. Thank you, Grotto. Thank you, San Francisco Library. Thank you, Michelle. And like I said, there's a whole team here with the library that's been making this happen and supporting this. So thank you to the entire team. And thanks, of course, for everyone who tuned in and joined us tonight. Thank you for being here. And thanks for such an interesting, lively conversation. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Michelle.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Matthew.
Yeah,
thank you, all of you. It was really a great conversation. I think people got a ton out of it. Be sure and share the YouTube link with your friends and family for everybody who's on here chatting to let everybody know about this great conversation. And We'll see you back in October for the next Grotto Night. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.